This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
It is 11:08 at WPSL 1590, the talk of the Treasure Coast, and you're on Ask a Rabbi.
And this is Rabbi Shafir Loeb for Congregation 8 Chaim, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast, coming to you right from Orange Avenue, almost at the studio.
Well, I thought you were going to be calling from Gainesville or some place.
Well, I felt like that. It's, one of the things that I always tell my students is that even rabbis make many, many mistakes, and this was one of them. I fully own it. I watched exit 131 go right past my car. I should say my car go right past 131.
Yeah, hey, I've done that. And so has Carol. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it happens every once in a while. It's a great show, Stuart. Unfortunately, I was paying a little more attention to it than I was what exit I was passing.
Yeah, It was a very interesting show, especially when he took us back to when he was a teenager.
Yeah.
And that is an interesting thought that Stuart had. When I was still in high school, I was fortunate to do Loyola University basketball when I was still a junior in high school. And my roommate happened to be African American, and he was one of only 4 blacks in our entire college at the time. And this was, well, I wasn't even in the college yet. I was still in high school. But, he was one of only 4 at Loyola University in 1960. That would have been 62. And so, yeah, I can understand how Stuart could feel the way he did, because Detroit Flanagan, my roomie, had the same feeling at Loyola.
Sticking out a little bit.
Yeah. Like, and a brilliant guy. And, I think he's done quite well with his life. I understand what Stuart was saying. And it's just, it's very difficult. It's very difficult, but I think it's quite telling that Stuart would be reliving that now 40 years later.
Sorry about that. Hit the radio button in the car.
That's okay. Yep.
So, I can think back when I moved to California is the first time that I went to an integrated classroom, because, the dinosaurs roamed when I started school. But, I was aware of it. It wasn't just 4, though. There was a more significant population. And,
that's interesting. So you went to school in, Pennsylvania and Ohio area?
No. I actually started school in Kansas City, Missouri.
Oh, okay.
I went to first grade in Kansas City, and then we moved to California.
But the school in Kansas City was all white?
I don't remember. I remember noticing African Americans. I remember noticing blacks. You give me 1 second here to switch on the mic.
All right. She's gonna.
I am here.
She's gonna sit right down here. And,
I am gonna sit right down here and try to get things organized. And I don't have my chair, so folks, bear with me while I get organized here.
Nope, we'll do that.
So anyway, so I remember noticing students who were. It's amazing how you just say something quietly on the air and it instantly happens. Thank you, Carol. Yeah. And folks, that is what it is with Alexa too. She listens, so just know that. All right, let me get at least into studio mode, and then we'll get Facebook going for those who watch us on Facebook. That will be a moment. But yes, I remember noticing that, I guess I just didn't have any black classmates in Kansas City. Thank you. And I suddenly did, and they were kids, and I was a kid.
Yeah, see, I grew up in Southern California, so I mean, we were totally mixed with whether it's Hispanics, blacks, or us. Yeah.
And I think that that's an important piece out of different areas segregated or stayed segregated longer. Older communities, I think, in general, tended to stay more isolated just because that's where people lived and they'd lived there for generations or whatever. California has a newer population, as does Port St. Lucie. Right? Port St. Lucie, of course, wasn't even here when you and I went to school.
Well, you're still a kid. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I know. It's hard when you're passing your 29th birthday.
That's right.
Again.
Yes.
Gotta love it, right?
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
So, what can I say?
Well, it's something, I guess it was always second nature to me. And that's why, talking with Detroit on the road as I did, in understanding some of his feelings, and those are feelings that I never had. Because it was always a mixed classroom for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, for me, a lot of the time, but not always. And
now, girls weren't in the classrooms.
yeah, well,
we were an experiment in the Catholic Church called co-instructional education.
okay.
They're in one wing of the school and we're in the other.
See if that. No, I was going to say
That
I didn't think.
go well
I would
at all.
imagine that would be even more distracting.
It was a disaster. It was an absolute disaster. We had the football team standing in the middle of the hallway because you couldn't talk to the girls on the other side of the football team. It was nuts. Needless to say, that's long gone.
Yeah.
Thank goodness.
What can I say? Believe it or not, Mayvo is now making me do something extra. I have no idea what its problem is.
Yeah, its lights are doing all sorts
Yeah,
of...
it's not happy here.
It's doing a weird dance now.
Yeah. What can I say?
She's got this very cool television camera, folks. It's
about 3 inches by 4 by 1.
Yeah. Now it's working.
Yeah. It took it a minute. It had to re-ask Facebook if it could transmit, of course.
There you go.
What can I say? Gotta love it. So, yeah, one of the discussions that I often have with my classes is about color and about some of the differences. And I can remember the ancient line that was used, God made you this way, that's why blah, blah, blah. And yes, but that's the big piece. God made all of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of us. Like, from Adam and Eve.
I think
Imagine
I heard
that.
of them once.
And so we're all related, we're all family, and we need to get along. Just to put it mildly. It's about time.
Yeah, and it just seems to be getting worse. And I
It comes and goes. It comes and goes. I think if you look at history, right, it's not rocket science. There have been times when it's been really horrible. And we're just past Holocaust Day, so we know that humans can be horrible to humans. And, Milgram did a study in the 60s where he tested the willingness of subjects to kill somebody, theoretically, as long as they weren't responsible. And it's a horrible experiment. It's not an ethical experiment for a number of reasons.
I guess.
Well, the setup was, and you can Google it you can see videos of it on YouTube. What he did was that he advertised for single white males to come in and participate in a study. And when the person would come in and become one of the subjects, they would be partnered with somebody they thought was also a subject, but who in fact was an actor, and then the observer for the experiment, who wore a gray or white lab coat. And the subjects, the real subject would always draw the teacher straw, and then the actor would always draw the student straw. And they would take the student into a room. They would talk to him, and he was basically healthy, except, he had had this heart condition once that wasn't fatal, da-da-da-da. He went into this long litany, and they strapped him into a chair, and the experiment was ostensibly about learning, the effect of negative reinforcement to encourage somebody to learn. Okay, so if somebody gave the wrong answer, they would shock them. Actually, that's a punishment. Never mind. It's a positive punishment.
It used to happen in grade school all the time.
Well,
no, I'm sorry.
And that's what made the lie plausible, right? Because that sounded okay. And at the beginning and the object here was to teach the learner, the student, a paired set of words like dog and cat, so that if you said dog, they would come back with cat. And they had to memorize this list, and then the teacher went through and challenged them. And there was actually a recording. The student undid themselves from the chair and put a recording, a reel-to-reel recorder, so that gives you the vintage. And so the answers were always the same for the teacher. And the student would purposely give wrong answers along the way. And the shock started at 15 volts and went all the way up into past 300 to like 450 volts on this machine. And the idea was that you advanced one notch every time the learner gave the wrong answer. So you started out with a 15, and they let the teacher experience the 15, and it's a little, it's not much. But it progresses, and the machine is labeled, extreme shock, severe shock, XXX, right? And danger, and all kinds of things. And 2/3 of the people went all the way to XXX, even though the learner had been screaming and then went silent. You couldn't see the learner. They were in another room being shocked. So you didn't know what really happened to them. It wasn't like they were play acting dying in front of you.
I hope this guy was arrested. This sounds horrible.
Well, he certainly has been chastised for that experiment.
I would think so.
But nobody was really hurt physically.
Yeah. Oh.
Right. The teacher does experience stress, and you can see that they sweat, they hesitate, they do this, and if they say they don't want to continue, the guy in the lab coat says, "Please continue. The experiment requires you to continue." There's 4 responses that he gives. And he's able to cajole 2/3 of the people to go all the way to XXX, thinking they're giving XXX to the student who's in the other room. And there's one in one of the videos, there's a guy who says, "I think he's dead in there." And the guy in the lab coat says, "I take responsibility for anything that happens." And that seems to be the magic piece. When he says that, people will go on. As long as they're not responsible, not such a big deal. And Milgram did this experiment, this obedience experiment, because of the Eichmann trials and the other war crime trials that were going on at that time, because the biggest defense was, I was just following orders.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
I
It wasn't
that.
my decision to do this. I was just following orders. And what he basically discovered was that if you accept the authority of the person giving you the order, you are much more likely to do something that you wouldn't do otherwise. And with that, I've got Lou on line 1. Please go ahead. Lou from Fort Pierce. Thank you for calling.
This might be a little bit late, but it's not the voltage that kills, it's the amperage.
Right, understand. Well, the guy is strapped to the chair in the teacher's mind.
Right.
And
well, that's got to have some, something cerebral to it.
Yeah.
That'll freak you out.
Yeah.
Just seeing those numbers.
And it did freak them out, and but again, the student wasn't actually connected, but the teacher, the subject playing the role of the teacher, did not know.
Uh-huh.
And they also didn't know what the amperage was. They, what resistance is there, right? What kills the cow is the distance between its front and back legs.
What?
Yeah, when electricity hits the cow, it's the traveling through the body between the front and the back
it's
legs.
got a ground.
Right, to the ground.
Gotcha.
Well, you're the smartest person I ever seen. Thank you for your program, and good luck to you.
Well, thank you, Lou. I appreciate that. Wow, I don't normally get told that I'm smart. Thank you. So thank you very much. Thank you for calling. What his point was is that amperage is what kills, not voltage. And, ohms or resistance, it's all those wonderful electrical terms from my engineering days.
Yeah. You with all your patents at Goodyear, yes.
Well, none of them were electrical. None of them involved electricity.
Oh, God.
Like the closest I came to that was I do have one of the, Goodyear has in my name, the one of the first software patents that was issued.
Cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was a way of analyzing failure modes in tires, but it could be applied to any nonlinear. Yeah, the title of it's something horrendous like piecewise analysis of nonlinear failure modes or something of that ilk.
And of course, because they own you 100%.
They own everything that comes out of your brain, your fingers, your toes, whatever.
So you were not compensated.
No,
for
I
this.
was. I was. I got this cute little plaque. It's about the same size as Mevo. All right, so it's about 3 inches by maybe 2 high. And on the back of it is a column, and the patent numbers are engraved, all of them, in the back of it. And on the front of it's the Goodyear logo. It's a cute little plaque, and I did keep it on my desk.
There you go.
So yeah, I was compensated.
The cost of a 79-cent plaque.
It's more than no, that was an expensive plaque.
I'm just kidding.
But it wasn't, I couldn't trade it in for a coffee if I wanted to.
There you go. Yeah, especially at Starbucks.
Yeah, we know that I love my coffee. So.
Yep.
So this is as good a time as any to say, if you enjoy listening to me, if you enjoy Ask a Rabbi, whether I'm late or on time, usually I'm on time, then please consider sponsoring one or more episodes of Ask a Rabbi. Give a call to the radio station. That's the same number as calling in. It's 772-340-1590. And ask for Greg or Carol, and they will help you sponsor one or more episodes of Ask a Rabbi. That would be a big help. And on that same note, if you'd like to call in, thank you, Lou, for calling, and anybody else who wants to. But that was a horrible experiment. I teach it as part of the ethics unit in psychology because of the extreme stress that was put. Was it necessary to put that much stress on the subject is the question that ethics would ask. And
obviously,
one of the other key things about an experiment is that you have experiments today that are governed by the APA ethics, is that you have to be able to walk away at any time without any repercussions. Now, Milgram did a little bit of that. They were paid. They were automatically paid just for being there, and they were told that they could leave. But that wasn't reinforced during the actual running of the experiment. And so
how long did this thing go on?
He did, each individual one probably only about an hour. But it's a long time, and whether or not he properly debriefed people at the end is one of the other big questions. We don't know that. That wasn't properly documented. He may not have. Odds are he didn't, but we don't know.
Wow. Gosh.
And, so those are some of the questions that you have to ask. APA requires a rule of do no harm. No harm that isn't absolutely essential. And even then, there are limits. The benefit has to more than outweigh the potential harm done. And as I'm actually teaching a course in Introduction to Experimental Psychology, where we learn a lot. There were a ton of really unethical experiments that were done. And the issue here is what would happen if there hadn't been somebody in the lab coat continuing this person on? Would they have continued anyway? That's a big question. Now, Milgram did run the experiment multiple times, varying different aspects of it, and you can research that. It was before the current ethics code came into practice. And I'm assuming that he got better at debriefing people. I don't know. I was not a fly on the wall, but we learn as much about what not to do in an experiment, because one of the key things in an experiment is that you have to be able to test a control against the subject population so that you can really see what in fact is causing the behavior. Because if you simply test whether or not you can create a behavior, then you don't know if everybody would do it. And, there are some interesting experiments. We do seem to respond to uniforms of any type, and a lab coat is a uniform. It's not a very profound one, but it is a symbol of authority. Who wears lab coats? Doctors in a hospital. All right, scientists in a lab.
Well, they talk about when you walk into the doctor's office.
White
coat syndrome.
Yeah, white coat anxiety, right?
Yeah, and your blood pressure goes up.
My guess is that the blood pressure starts going up at home when you think about going to the doctor.
Yeah, well, that too. Yeah.
But so let's go back to Pavlov's dogs. Pavlov's dogs didn't respond to a bell. They responded to the lab coats of his lab assistants, whom they knew were going to give them the yummy meat powder that they survived on. And since that was really the highlight of their day, they got excited and started drooling when they saw the lab coats coming in, because they knew they'd be fed.
God, I thought it was a sound. Huh.
No, it was the lab coats. And actually Pavlov was very annoyed by it, because he wasn't researching psychology. He was researching digestion. And the dogs, PETA would be beyond over the top on them, as would all animal folks, because the experiment was incredibly cruel to the dogs. They basically lived without interaction, strapped into a harness the bulk of their lives, and they were fed this yummy meat powder, and their salivary glands, by surgery, had been rerouted to outside their mouth. Yeah. The more you talk about it, the worse it gets. So we want to talk about a horrible experiment. That was one, and it wasn't even the intentional thing. He wrote about the salivation because he was trying to eliminate it. He was trying to figure out how to undo it. But since there was so little stimulation in the dogs' lives, that the being fed was absolutely the high point of their day, even if it was a lousy meal and it barely kept them alive. Yeah.
Wow. Oh, gosh.
Yeah, we would not want to allow that kind of experimentation to go on today at all.
I would hope not.
So.
But you hear of some of the weird experiments going on around the world, and you just kind of shake your head.
Yeah, I think back to my college days when I worked as a translator at the diabetic unit at Hadassah Hospital I did this for 1 year while I was going to school for my rabbinic studies in Israel. And because I've always been this poor kid. So I did it for pocket money in Israel to be able to, do things.
Survive.
Yeah, those kind of things.
Sure.
And so they were doing research on sugar in a rat's diet and how much sugar created diabetes. The rat was picked because the physiology was close enough That's why rats are used in labs, folks, because their bodies respond similarly to humans. And therefore, people can sort of kind of extrapolate. Dogs are closer. Dogs are harder, though. They're bigger and take more care. Rats, they just locked up in a cage and fed them basically sugar, and then measured how long it took to come down with diabetes. And the rats were just the ones on the high sugar diet. They did have a group that wasn't on the high sugar diet and a group that was. And the ones that were on the high sugar diet definitely were a higher energy crowd. They bounced around in their cages. You could tell which ones were in which group. So there was no possibility of a blind there, and there wasn't a blind. Would that experiment pass muster in the U.S.? No. But it was funded by the U.S. We fund research all over the planet, folks.
Oh.
In places that are not supervised as much by things in the U.S. It's one of the things that made me cynical in life.
Yeah, you hear about some of the research done in the old Eastern Bloc countries and kind of shake your head and say it's them, and then you realize that the
we're
U.S.
paying
is paid
for
for part of it.
Yeah, and if you pay for it, then you're responsible.
Yeah.
Right. So, and that's the piece. So I've talked about things like Zara. Right. Zara buys a lot of its clothing from some of the questionable parts of the world. China, Bangladesh, Brazil. Places where we know there are human rights violations in the workplace. And if you buy clothing from them, you are supporting their lack of checking on those issues. And I totally get the whole picture. I get it from Zara. Zara wants to look absolutely wonderful, and they call these folks suppliers, and they claim that, they're finishing the clothing in Spain. Well, what they're doing is sewing a button or something on. It's barely finishing, or maybe they're sewing the Zara tag in. I don't know. It's not what you'd call heavy-duty finishing. It's the really last touches. Just enough to qualify for, etc. And as I say that, I am probably wearing something I didn't check today, but I wouldn't be surprised if the shirt I'm wearing was made in China or somewhere that I might not want to know. And it's hard. It's hard to ponder the responsibility that we have in day-to-day because we're human. And the system requires a sea change of responsibility. God made all of us. I'm going to come back to that. God made all of us. And if you really believe in God, and you really believe that we should love one another, whether you get that out of Leviticus where Jesus got it, or you get it because Jesus said it as he was teaching Torah, or if you get it from Guru Nanak, or if you get it from the Buddha, I don't care where you get the idea. If you get the idea that we are all connected and we're supposed to love ourselves and each other, then we've got to start being kinder to ourselves, to all of us. Because we are all interconnected. We are all one thing. We are part of this living planet. And, to Stewart's point that he made, we do go through waves of being nastier and being kinder, being nastier and being kinder. I don't know how to shift that all the way to the kinder side. We've got to start doing that. When we harness the potential of all human beings to make this planet a strong and viable place to live, we'll be a whole lot closer to paradise and heaven right here on earth. Right? And that's the promise that's within Torah. If you take care of the planet, the animals, and each other, then you will live heavenly days right here on earth. So it is within our potential. So I'm going to play that scripture game, right? Lo b'shamayim, it's not in heaven, it's not across the sea, it's not behind a mountain. It's right here inside us, in our hearts. We can do better. And we are always invited to do that. And I'm not being namby-pamby about it. Like I said, I understand the finances. If you cost building or making garments in the U.S. versus making them overseas and taking that horrible environmental footprint of bringing it in, not to mention the supply chain footprint and dependencies. If you take all of that technology out of the U.S., then you're going to make yourself totally dependent on others, and that makes you more vulnerable. But I understand the cost of it. It's a lot cheaper where people are barely making a subsistence living, if they're even doing that, than it is to pay full fare. And when I go and want to buy a dress, do I want to pay $500 for the dress? Do I want to pay $100 or do I want to pay $30? I get it. These are not easy moral decisions. And if we simply base them on who gives the lowest cost, then I think we're shirking some of our responsibility as human beings. And I was looking at, I happen to love Hawaiian pothos. And you can see Hawaiian pothos all over the place. Not to be confused with its close cousin golden pothos, which also can be beautiful and is overly abundant in South Florida because we don't have the frost to kill it in the winter, so it grows very wild. Golden pothos, I think, is also pretty. I understand that it can get so dense that if you don't trim it, it can get way out of hand. I like to keep my plants in pots anyway, so that's a whole different point. But I walked into, somebody had asked for a cutting from a Hawaiian pothos, and I happened to have them. And so I was bringing one into school, and somebody came up to me and says, that's an invasive. And yes, it's a class 2 invasive, which means that it grows easily and can go wild in the environment. Not surprising. And its leaves get huge. I mean, the leaves get about maybe 2 feet across.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a big, big plant. I've got a big cutting right now in my house that somebody just gave me of one that is like 2 feet, and I'm trying to figure out how to trellis it in a pot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My goodness, that's huge.
Well, the stalk is probably a good 1.5 to maybe even 2 inches in diameter.
Wow. Okay.
Beautiful, beautiful cutting. It's a 2-leaf cutting. So it won't grow for a while, but it will eventually become quite beautiful, I hope. And so I was thinking about that theme of what plants are invasive and what does invasive really mean. A class 1 invasive is one that actually displaces native vegetation. The pothos is not in that category. It doesn't replace what grows here in Florida usually, and like the pepper tree does. The pepper is killing all of the native vegetation anywhere near where it grows because it just is so abundant. It's beautiful, and I've seen it actually in people's gardens and point out to them, you might want to replace this over time. Get rid of it because it will grow hundreds of seeds, maybe even thousands of seeds a season, and those root very, very easily and very well.
And do a number on your septic tank.
Do a number on a lot of things. Those are quick growing roots, and
Yep.
they have no natural predators in Florida. The pothos doesn't have very many either. It's very resistant to many things, and it's drought tolerant, so it thrives without frost. Won't become invasive up north, but it'll continue to come back. So it's a perennial. But I was thinking along those lines that humans are incredibly invasive on the planet. Right? We do displace the native population, both plant and animal.
We don't have to look too far.
No, we don't have to look too far.
We don't have to look far.
No, we have that tendency.
Yeah, just talk to the folks in the Seminole Nation right on Okeechobee Boulevard.
Yeah. And look what we did to the Japanese
Oh, yeah.
in World War II.
Sure.
No due process there, folks.
Nope.
Yeah.
Yeah, I toured some of the camps in Yuma.
Yeah.
And, this was back in the 70s, and still, you get a chill.
You get an absolute chill.
You get a chill.
It looks altogether too similar to concentration camps.
Oh, yeah, it's identical.
It doesn't have the wholesale slaughterhouses, but.
Yeah, not exactly the presidential suite at the Hilton.
No, and property was possessed by the government and taken over from a lot of Japanese Americans.
Yeah. Oh, you bet.
We're not talking about folks that were foreign nationals, folks. We're talking about American, both born here and naturalized. Populations that had picked America as their country. And that fear of a fifth column, that's as old as Pharaoh and the Israelites in Egypt. That's the reason that Pharaoh gives for exterminating the Israelites when they had camped or were dwelling in Goshen for 400 years. And Pharaoh says, they might turn and join an enemy if we're ever invaded. That's the fifth column fear, and it's always used. It's effective. It scares the living daylights out of people because people forget that human beings are human beings. And we are human beings, and we're not predisposed to do something based on our facial features, our skin color, our hair color, our eye color. And I'm not oblivious to the idea that there are spies and sleeper cells and all the other threats that are real. They absolutely are real. And there are traitors and there are people who are compromised and all of that. I'm not the least bit unaware of that. There needs to be a balance. We need to be able to secure our lives, but we also have to do a sea change as a species and become more sensitive to each other. And I told this story in my classes. I tell it quite often. Speaking of black and white. So I was a teenager, and this will date it right away. We were shopping at the A&P, and my niece was visiting. She was, 2 or 3. She was talking and walking. And we had gone shopping, and I had finished loading up the groceries in my mother's car, and she was chattering away. Very common thing for my mother. And I shut the door on the groceries, and she drove away. And my niece and I are standing there on the front stoop of A&P. And I knew it wasn't going to last long because we only lived a few blocks from the supermarket. My mother was going to get home, and there'd be nobody there to carry the groceries in. She would be back. My niece, however, is screaming and yelling because Grandma left us.
Sure, oh yeah.
It was a very scary moment, and I'm trying to comfort her. And as I'm comforting her, there's an African-American woman standing with her groceries waiting for the person. Because in Philadelphia at the time, they had those barriers up. You couldn't take the carts out into the parking lot. The cars had to drive up and pick up the groceries. And so she was waiting. And my niece looks at her and says to me in the sweet tones of a young child, "Oh, look, that lady's all chocolate."
Oh, no.
Whereupon I am, of course, wishing.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I'm wishing the earth would just open up,
Oh,
swallow
sure.
me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And let's just put an end to this whole thing, right? Because embarrassment really feels fatal in the moment. That woman was an amazing angel. She, of course, heard my niece.
Sure.
And she came over. She bent down. She got down on her knees. So she was eye to eye with my niece. And she said, "Would you like to touch me? That would be okay. If it's okay with..." And she looked up at me, "If it's okay with you." And I'm flabbergasted. I think this is wonderful. This is amazing. And my niece did. She touched her, and they got to talking a little bit. So my niece had a really powerful lesson that I couldn't have scripted if I'd tried. And the key is that I still remember this. I can still see that woman. I can still see her.
Yeah.
And fast forward, my husband and I are newlyweds, also super poor because we're newlyweds. And we decided to take a long weekend in D.C. And we lived in Ohio at the time. So it was a simple matter of driving to the hotel. And we picked the hotel. We picked a chain hotel, but we picked one that was very cheap because we were students. And the other criteria for it was that it had to be either on the near a subway connection, because we knew the subways were good in D.C., or at least on a bus to the subway, because we weren't going to drive our car in downtown D.C. and put up with parking fees.
Smart
and
move.
all of that. Yeah, we quickly figured out that subway fees were a whole lot less. And so we get into the hotel and we check in. We didn't think anything of it. They stared at us a little bit, but, hey, we're from Ohio. We look like Ohioans. And we go to the room and, get up nice and early, get to the bus stop. And we apparently got to the bus stop. We didn't have the schedule, so there wasn't anybody there, so probably we'd just missed a bus. Okay, no big deal. We weren't on any time schedule. We just wanted to get downtown and see museums and walk the mall, other typical D.C. kind of things. And as we're standing there, a couple of African Americans walk up, no big deal. And before the bus comes, we kind of look around and there's like 20, and everybody's African American. Get on the bus, no big deal. Look on the bus, and we're the only white faces on the bus. Okay. So we've clearly picked a black neighborhood in D.C. It looked clean. It was fine. No big deal. Go to the subway and get on the subway. And the subway, when we started, was pretty much all black. By the time we get into D.C., it's almost all white, which was interesting. We watched it. We watched
Wow.
a lot of the
Really?
black. Yeah, a lot of blacks got off at various stops, and whites tended to get on later on, and the subway changed in internal color. And we at the end of the day, we get back on the subway, reverse the route, and it becomes black again. We get on the bus to go back to the hotel, and we're on the bus, and Bill and I are keenly aware we're the only white faces on the bus, or light faces, I should say. And this little girl says, "Oh, Mommy, that lady looks like a ghost."
Oh, no.
And I can sense that this mother is also wishing the earth would open up and swallow.
Sure.
And I have this flashback to this woman at the A&P. And I did the same thing. I got up on the bus, and I bent down near her. I got on my hunch down and turned to the mother and said, "If it's okay with you, your child is welcome to touch me. Would you like to touch me, honey?" And so, I fast forwarded this
Sure.
same behavior. It wasn't that I was a genius. And I have a feeling that I probably helped this young girl not be as afraid as she might otherwise have been.
Because if she grew up in a black neighborhood,
She wouldn't have seen.
white faces.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
And that's the real key. That's the key to breaking down some of the stereotypes and therefore some of the prejudices, is that if we get to know each other as individuals, we run a much better chance of treating each other as human beings. When we live isolated in our thoughts or in reality, then we become afraid of somebody who looks different from us. In 1954, I think it was, Rogers and Hammerstein wrote the "You've Got to Be Carefully Taught" in South Pacific.
Yep.
Right, so it's not that we don't know this. The line in the song goes, "You have to be taught, carefully taught, before you are 6 or 7 or 8, to hate all the folks that your relatives hate." And it's a learned behavior. It's not natural. It is natural to be concerned about something that looks different. We are visual creatures. We clearly take in information through our eyes. And so the key is not to be color blind, but to be color kind.
Ooh, like that.
Right.
Like that.
People have color. That's the beautiful mosaic. That, folks, offers the U.S. some of the greatest potential. Imagine being able to tap into all of the cultures, ethnicities, and understandings of the planet and use them to our mutual benefit. Wow. Nobody would be able to stop her. We really would become a great country. And no, I don't think we're there right now. I still owe allegiance to America.
We're a long way away from that.
Well, we've certainly gone out of our way in many, many years, not just recently,
No.
to make ourselves a laughingstock. With that year that we have plays or movies like Mrs. Robinson, or a very popular song many years ago, a few decades ago, of hello, I love you, won't you tell me your name? You know, that did not help the American image. And when you add to that the fact that far too many Americans are monolingual, only speak one language, we have hampered our children in the development of critical thinking and positive skills by limiting the language knowledge to one language.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel really bad that I did not carry on Italian from my grandparents, my aunt, uncle. My mom just would not speak it at home.
Yeah.
She just wouldn't.
And I understand, again, I understand both sides, the desire to blend in, to look like your peers, because this, you know, there's power in numbers, right? It's the zebra who lingers outside the herd that becomes the prey.
Well, and she was alive as a kid when Grandpa was starting in the movie industry in Hollywood, and they had an Italian purge, which is how his name was changed from Baronini to Baron, and they did not even ask any questions.
Well, a lot of people...
That was weird.
A lot of people have changed names. And it's interesting because I see that... you know, that phrase, it's a nice normal name. What that means is a white single male name, right? Folks, let's get real. Let's call it what it is. We are seeing less of people changing their names today. So we see a lot of more interesting names. And of course, Shafir is not a common name, and Loeb is, even though it's British, not as common a name. And you can look it up, folks. Loeb shoes. I don't know if they're relatives or not, but probably
lost relatives,
somewhere
maybe?
along. Yeah, who knows where. And that's from my husband's side. But I have cousins whose, when they arrived in the U.S., their European name had been Pashkas, and they became Parks. Again, the effort to fit. And I get that. There's a desire to want to blend in where you're choosing to live. And I see it in reverse when people move to Israel and decide to make that their country. They take on Israeli-sounding names.
Yeah, I get that.
And, yeah, that's a natural desire and tendency. And isn't it wonderful that we don't always feel the need to do that? And, yeah. We could gain so much from our minorities. We are becoming what is called a minority-majority population, which means that the majority of people in the U.S. belong to one or more minorities. Mm-hmm. We're actually there, although it's not well documented. And yes, that does make any one group a minority. But if we harness the power of that mosaic, wow, what a gorgeous thing we could create. Mm-hmm. But that takes not wanting to hold on to... It's hard to not want to hold on to privilege. After all, you're used to it. You know? And all's fair in love and war? Not really. No, it's not. That I think's the phrase that we need to lose. It's not all fair. It's not okay to hit below the belt. It's not okay to win unfairly. You need to, if you're going to compete, you need to win fairly. And that's something I think we really do need to teach our kids. The object is not to win, the object is to win fairly. Or at least compete honestly, fairly, and to the best of your ability. And if you win, you win. If you don't, it's a learning opportunity. There's more to life than just being on top. And, what can I say? I'm getting close to the edge, and I'll say it one more time. If you like what you're hearing from me, if this makes sense to you, if you want to argue with me or you agree with me, either way, consider sponsoring one or more episodes of Ask a Rabbi, and give a call to 772-340-1590. Ask to speak to Greg or Carol. they'll help you do that. And I do want to mention the plant sale has been moved. We're moving it in May to Memorial Day weekend because that's a day when we can take advantage of our 2-day format of the sale.
There you go.
Sunday and Monday from 1 to 5. Please stop by the Temple, 540 Northwest University Boulevard, Suite 102. Front building, right next to the elevators and stairs. Easy to find. We'll have big signs out that say plant sale on our windows, so you can spot us. And lots of good things going to be going on there. This weekend, we have a Lag BaOmer picnic. If you'd like to come to that, please give us a call at the Temple. Or give me a call on my cell phone. That works too. That's 520-247-4741. And give a call to the Temple, 772-934.
Oh, no.
Yeah, 11. I don't know. I don't remember the rest of the numbers. Anyway, check us out on Facebook or on the website, www.eitzchaym.org.
So now, where is the picnic going to be?
The picnic's going to be at the Temple. We're going to pull out the grill and make some burgers and dogs and typical American fare. Lag BaOmer is a picnic kind of holiday because people would go outside and pretend to go on a picnic so they could study Torah when it wasn't quite so allowed. And we thank one of the folks that I spent a lot of time studying when I was working on my master's, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who helped rebuild Torah when Rabbi Akiva's students were all crucified. Lag BaOmer was the end of the crucifixion spree. Lasted 33 days.
Wow. Gosh.
So, yeah, thousands of rabbis crucified just for being a rabbi. On that cheerful note, have a happy Lag BaOmer. The second part of the Omer is much more cheerful as we make our way to Shavuot, the giving of the 10 Commandments. This is Rabbi Shafir Loeb for Congregation Eitz Chaim, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast.
And the service time?
7:30 tonight, and then that's at 540 Northwest University Boulevard, Suite 102, front building, right near the stairs.
All right. Have a good week.
You too. Take care. God willing, be here next week.
You've been listening to Ask a Rabbi right here on WPSL Port St. Lucie. Talking the Treasure Coast, webcaster to the world.